All right, so you know how everyone always talks about those legendary house parties? The ones with the music blasting, furniture on its last legs, and that mysterious stain on the carpet that probably has a great story behind it.
Oh, absolutely. We've all been there, or at least heard the stories.
Right. But get this, those gatherings, as wild as they might seem, are actually a gold mine of sociological insight.
You're kidding. I never thought about it that way, but it makes sense.
Yeah, it's like beneath the surface of the red solo cups and questionable dance moves, there's this whole hidden layer of social dynamics playing out. And that's what we're diving into today.
Sounds fascinating. What kind of insights are we talking about?
Well, we're digging into this really interesting study that looks at house parties from a global perspective. They've got the US, the UK, even Russia all represented.
Wow, talk about a cross-cultural party tour. What's the main takeaway?
Basically, it boils down to this. House parties aren't just about letting loose. They're about how we build communities, navigate social structures, and even challenge the norms.
That's wild. I mean, we often dismiss these gatherings as just casual fun, but there's clearly a lot more going on beneath the surface.
Exactly. And one of the first things this article dives into is the idea of house parties as third places.
Third places.
Yeah, it's a term coined by sociologist Ray Oldenburg.
Okay. Rings a bell, but remind me.
Basically, he's talking about spaces that are neither our homes, which are like our personal sanctuaries, nor our workplaces, where it's all about productivity and deadlines.
I see. So those in-between spaces.
Right. Third places are those spaces where we go to truly connect, to be ourselves, to unwind and engage with our communities. Like, think about your favorite local coffee shop.
Oh, yeah, totally. Or that park bench where you always see those people deep in conversation.
Exactly. Or even that quirky bookstore downtown that always seems to have a book club meeting going on.
Right. Those are all classic third places. But a house party, how does that fit into the equation?
Because for those few hours, a private home transforms. It's no longer just someone's personal space. It becomes this shared social space. The boundaries blur, routines are put on hold, and suddenly you're in this unique environment where social rules are a little looser, conversations flow a little easier, and you're more likely to strike up a conversation with someone you might not otherwise.
So it's like hitting the pause button on everyday life and stepping into a different social dimension.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that this whole idea of the house party as a social experiment isn't new. This article traces it all the way back to Victorian-era Britain.
Now that's a blast from the past. Victorian era house parties, what were those like?
Picture this. Back then, house parties were these exclusive events for the upper crust, like a way for the elite to challenge social norms, but within the confines of their opulent homes, of course.
Oh, so very different from the kinds of house parties we might think of today.
Totally. We've gone from buttoned up gatherings to, well, whatever you want to call what we have now. But it's amazing to see how much the vibe has changed over time. And speaking of different vibes, this study doesn't just stop with Victorian England. It takes us on a global party tour.
Oh, fun. Where are we headed first?
Well, we've got to start with the UK, right? And when you think of house parties in the UK, you've got to talk about the infamous skins parties.
Skins parties. Okay, you've piqued my interest.
So, for those who don't know, Skins was this British teen drama. Think like a very unfiltered portrayal of teenage life.
Ah, I see. Lots of angst and rebellion.
Yeah, pretty much. And
Yeah.
Skins parties were basically the real life embodiment of that.
Gotcha. So these gatherings are all about pushing boundaries, testing limits,
Pretty much.
and probably giving parents a few gray hairs in the process.
Oh, I'd say so. But hey, at least it's contained to someone's living room, right?
That's one way to look at it. But let's hop across the globe for a second. What's the house party scene like in, say, Russia?
All right, so Russia's interesting because it's gone through this whole evolution when it comes to house parties.
Okay, tell me more.
So, back in the Soviet era, you had these gatherings called kvartniks.
Kvarcheniks sounds intense.
Not quite. They were actually much smaller, more intimate affairs, often centered around music.
Ah, so a way for people to connect and express themselves.
Right.
Especially in a society that was, pretty heavily controlled at the time.
Exactly. Like a mini rebellion, but with music instead of Molotov cocktails.
I like it. So intimate gatherings, music. What kind of snacks were we talking? Asking for a friend?
I don't know about that, but fast forward to modern day Russia, and you've got VPs, which are kind of like the Kvartnik's wilder cousin.
Wilder how?
Well, imagine this. Spontaneous gatherings, sometimes attracting hundreds of people,
Right.
many of whom are complete strangers.
Wow, that's a serious party. And I thought my college apartment got crowded. But so we're talking like Massive ragers.
Sometimes.
Hmm.
But there are actually different types of VPs, each with its own unique vibe and set of unspoken rules.
Oh, interesting. Like,
Well, you've got Vipeska Nastaron, which is all about meeting new people.
mm,
Then there's Legion, which is more for couples.
okay, so something for everyone.
Right. And then, if you're really feeling adventurous, you've got Podvodnaya Lodka.
Podvodnaya Lodka, that doesn't sound very party-like. What is that? Some kind of Russian drinking game?
It literally translates to submarine.
Submarine.
Yeah, and the name is pretty fitting because in a Podvodnaya Lodka party, you're essentially locked in until the party's over.
Whoa, talk about commitment. You don't leave a submarine party unless it's an emergency.
Exactly. But, all jokes aside, these VPskas, as wild as they might seem, actually point to a really interesting social shift in Russia.
What do you mean?
Well, the article talks about the decline of Dvorovaya kultura, which is basically courtyard culture.
Courtyard culture.
Yeah, it was these informal public spaces where people used to gather, but with fewer of those spaces available, young people especially turned to VPskas as a way to create their own sense of community.
So it's like a reaction to the changing social landscape, almost like social rebellion, but with better music and hopefully fewer questionable decisions.
Exactly. It's like we're hardwired to find those connections, even when the world around us feels a little shaky.
Exactly. It's a testament to our resilience, really. And it makes you realize that there's more to these gatherings than meets the eye.
Right. It's not always about sticking it to the man or whatever. Sometimes it's just about taking a break from the everyday grind and actually connecting with people.
Absolutely. And that actually brings us to another really interesting aspect of house parties that this article explores. It's the idea of these gatherings as a form of retreatism.
Retreatism. Okay, hold on. Now, I'm picturing a yoga retreat, but instead of meditation, there's a DJ, a makeshift dance floor, and someone trying to make a gourmet meal in the kitchen at 3 a.m.
Well, while that does sound interesting, it's not quite what we're talking about here.
Okay, good to know. So, what is retreatism in this context?
Well, it's a term that comes from sociologist Robert Merton, and he used it to describe ways people cope with the pressures and expectations of society. Basically, it's like creating a temporary escape from the norm.
Ah, okay, I see where you're going with this.
Uh,
Like a pressure valve release.
Exactly. When the weight of it all just gets to be a bit much, house parties can offer this release valve a chance to step back, let loose, and just exist in the moment.
And surrounded by people who are hopefully feeling the same way. It's like hitting the mute button on the outside world for a few glorious hours.
Precisely. And the article argues that this function of house parties, this idea of them as a form of retreatism, becomes even more important during times of major upheaval or uncertainty.
Oh, absolutely. Like, think about the pandemic.
Exactly. Everyone was craving social connection, a sense of normalcy. And even though house parties had to adapt, even if it were smaller or, virtual for a while.
Right, everyone had that Zoom party phase.
Yes. But even in those different forms, they still provided that much needed escape from isolation, that sense of community when we all desperately needed it.
It's like when the world feels chaotic, we seek refuge in those spaces that feel familiar, comforting, even if those spaces happen to have questionable decor and a faint smell of stale beer.
It's about finding those little pockets of normalcy in a world that feels anything but normal.
I'm with you on that. And you know what else seems to make a frequent appearance when it comes to house parties and dealing with stress?
I think I know where you're going with this.
Let's be real, it's the alcohol. It's like the unofficial guest of honor at most house parties.
It's true. It's almost impossible to talk about house parties without acknowledging the, shall we say, social lubricant that often plays a role.
Right, and the article actually has some interesting things to say about this. For one, it talks about drinking at house parties, especially for young adults, as a kind of modern day rite of passage.
Oh, that's an interesting take. Explain that one to me.
So it's not just about the act of drinking, right? It's about more than just like the taste of cheap beer or whatever. It's about testing boundaries, pushing limits, figuring out social dynamics, all within a setting that feels, relatively safe and familiar. House parties become this controlled environment where young people can kind of experiment with alcohol, navigate its effects, without hopefully, the higher stakes of, say, a bar or a club.
So, like a social laboratory of sorts.
Exactly. A place where you can, try on different social personas, test out your tolerance, both for alcohol and maybe some questionable dance moves.
All under the watchful eye of your closest friends. Hopefully.
Ideally. Though, of course, we have to acknowledge that the whole alcohol and house party situation isn't without its downsides. Like, the article talks about how, while drinking games might seem like harmless fun, they can sometimes encourage rapid consumption, excessive drinking.
Oh, definitely. There's a reason why some of those drinking games are called what they are.
Right. And that can obviously have some not so fun consequences. But I did think it was interesting. They found that statistically speaking, drinking is actually more prevalent in student dorms than at house parties.
Really? That's surprising.
Right. I guess it just goes to show it's not always the party that gets out of control. Sometimes it's just the people.
Or the lack of other things to do in the case of those dorm rooms.
Exactly.
Mm.
But let's shift gears for a second, because this article takes an interesting turn. Turns out, not all gatherings that look like house parties are actually about letting loose and having a good time.
Oh, what do you mean? You've got my attention now.
Well, they talk about this whole other category of gatherings called home quasi-parties.
Quasi parties? Okay, now I know something's up. Break it down for me.
So picture this. You've got the setting of a house party, right?
Mm-hmm.
People gathered in someone's home, maybe some food and drinks, but the whole vibe is different. It's not about pure socializing, it's about achieving some other objective.
So it's like a wolf in sheep's clothing. A party with a secret agenda. Okay, I need examples.
Think about those classic Tupperware parties.
Oh, you mean the ones where you end up going home with a set of measuring cups you never knew you needed?
Exactly. On the surface, it's a social gathering, but underneath, it's all about selling Tupperware. They're tapping into the power of social connections to move products,
Wow, my mind is blown. That's actually kind of brilliant.
right? And it's not just sales. The article talks about how house parties have been used for everything from educational purposes to public health initiatives.
Get out of here.
I'm serious. There are examples from Denmark where they use this model for health interventions in underserved communities.
That's amazing.
Right. And then in the US, there have been cases of like home-based gatherings specifically designed to educate mothers about infant mortality prevention.
So instead of a beer pong tournament, it's a health education seminar disguised as a casual get together.
Exactly. And it works. It shows how powerful it can be to meet people where they are,
Yeah.
in a setting that feels comfortable, familiar.
It's like sneaking in some broccoli with that mac and cheese. You get all the benefits, but in a way that feels fun and engaging.
Exactly. And it makes you realize just how adaptable we are as social creatures.
It's true. No matter what challenges we face, we always find a way to connect, to learn, to make sense of the world around us.
Even if it's in someone's living room, surrounded by questionable decorations and the lingering smell of like 1,000 snacks.
Hey, some of our best thinking happens in those kinds of environments.
That's for sure. But before we get too lost in the sauce, so to speak, I think it's time to try and tie all of this together.
Right, we've covered a lot of ground here, from Victorian era soirees to modern day podvodnaya lodkas. It's clear that house parties are a lot more complex than we might think.
Absolutely. So what's the key takeaway?
Mm.
If we had to sum up everything we've learned about the sociology of house parties, what would it be?
Well, for me, it boils down to this. Never underestimate the power of a good gathering. Whether it's a chance to unwind with friends, celebrate a life event, or even, learn something new about infant health, house parties tap into something fundamental about what it means to be human.
I love that. It's like, yes, on the surface, they might seem like all about just letting loose and having a good time. And hey, there's definitely a place for that.
Right.
But they're also about so much more. They're about our need for connection, our desire to challenge the norm, even our capacity for change. It's all there, playing out in living rooms and backyards across the globe.
It's like a microcosm of society, really.
Totally. It's like that saying, you can learn a lot about a person by the company they keep. But in this case, it's more like you can learn a lot about society by the parties it throws.
I like that. And I think after this little deep dive, we'll never look at a house party invite the same way again.
Me neither.
Yeah?
Next time I get one, I'll be showing up with my sociological lens firmly in place. And maybe a plate of cookies, just to, blend in.
A true researcher in the field.
Exactly. Well, there you have it, folks. Another deep dive successfully conquered. We explored the surprisingly complex world of house parties, uncovered their hidden sociological significance, and hopefully left you with some food for thought, maybe even some inspiration to host your own sociological experiment disguised as a casual get-together.
And if you're hungry for more insights into the unexpected corners of human behavior, well, you know where to find us.
That's right. Hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel for more thought-provoking deep dives into the everyday. And hey, if you ever happen to throw a house party that doubles as a sociological study, let us know. We might just have to crash.